Hello and welcome to another episode of Building Success, a real estate podcast. My name is Nick, and I will once again be your guide as we talk to some of the best and brightest in the worlds of real estate tech, operations, and financials from across the globe. This podcast would not be possible without listeners such as yourselves, so if you like what you hear and you want to hear more of it, please think about liking or subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen to this show, even YouTube. All of that goes into our rating and helping this podcast get to even more listeners. One thing I'd like to point out that is new with Building Success is we have a new website, www.buildingsuccess.io. Completely rebranded, has a lot of information about past episodes, previous guests you may have heard of on the show and want to learn more about, and we'll give you all the content from Building Success into the future as well. So please do check out www.buildingsuccess.io. Leave some feedback there as well. Contact us about anybody you'd like to hear on future episodes. We'd definitely love to hear from you. Today's episode, I speak with VTS, specifically Joe Moskowitz and Rick Ferrino, about data and keeping clean data, organizing your data. As a real estate organization, what you can do with your data if you're able to keep it clean, keep it standardized, and where all of this is going moving forward. We've heard a lot of news about data breaches, and we didn't really focus on that in this episode, more about some of the positives of where you can take your data and what the future looks like with the ability to clean, standardize, organize, and then being able to take that data to the next level and analyze it for not only yourselves internally, but then for all of your external stakeholders. So nice conversation. We hope you stay tuned. Again, if you like what you hear, please let us know it. And without further ado, here is VTS. All right, welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining me today. I am, of course, here with VTS and Joe, Rick. If you wouldn't mind each just please introducing yourselves.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Joe Moskowitz here. I run the Strategic Partnerships team over at VTS. Been with VTS about 3 years now, so really involved in our business and technical relationships with other companies in the commercial real estate space, with an emphasis on other technology platforms, consulting firms, and iterating on those relationships to see what sort of value we could unlock on behalf of mutual customers.
Yeah, and I'm Rick Ferrino, Chief Data Officer. I work on any of the products that involve data. So that includes many of the integrations we've done with our partners. I also focus on any of the newer products we're building around data, and then any data we're pushing out to other partners as well.
So data is definitely the topic of conversation today, and that's definitely what I want to dive into. But just so you're both aware, I'd like to make this episode a bit more of a roundtable, so please feel free to jump in, speak up at any point in the conversation. But getting back to data, I think the big piece here that I want to focus in on today is how to maintain clean data. And let's start kind of with the basics. What does it mean to have clean data? Sure.
I mean, when I do have quite a few of these types of conversations with our customer base, and in truth, we have a grid that where the first thing you need to do is identify what data actually is important to be clean, right? In certain situations, you have unstructured fields, strings of text that you don't really care necessarily if it's orderly, but things like commencement date or the fact that a lease is tied to a specific space is going to be imperative. Right? And so at the end of the day, it first comes down to a conversation around prioritization. What types of data actually matter most? And that really comes back to business outcomes. What are you actually trying to do with the data? And that determines what actually is important in terms of cleanliness of the data. From there, it's then understanding what is the current state of the data, right? Where does it live relative to where you want it to be, right? If you do find that something that's super important to a report or something that you're trying to build is just a string of text, right? You're going to have to structure that, understand what exactly you're going to want to do to make it more standardized, right? And it comes back down to a concept of data governance, like being a little bit more strict in terms of the way that the data is stored, the way that the same data point is stored in different parts of whatever systems you're using, right? At the end of the day, it's an analysis of the current state, and then that's sort of the avenue that gets you to cleaner data, which to me, the cleanest data is structured data, right? Having a structure, having a set of rules in place in advance across one system or 50 systems is going to be vital to that concept of cleanliness, and then you kind of go from there.
So let's talk structured data, and the opposite of that is inconsistent, bad data. A lot of talk has been made in the industry about keeping clean data and the importance of such. What are some of the trends that you've seen, obviously as the chief data officer there at VTS, and what are some of the issues that are being presented?
Sure. I think one of the primary use cases is first just the idea of object management, right? Like in different systems, you might have different IDs for a property, right? Or in different systems, you might have, or even in the same system, you might have different IDs for the same tenant across your portfolio, across even the same building in situations, right? It's the same tenant across time, right? You have different IDs or different names for that same tenant. So the idea of first attempting to get a better picture of the current historic and future state of the world in terms of the consistency of the actual objects that you're interacting with, I think is vital, right? Reconciling to a single source of truth for properties, single source of truth for tenants, single source of truth for spaces even, right? And that's going to be one of the biggest battles. I mean, a lot of times we'll see people start much simpler than that, like data inconsistency, specifically like options, right? Some options, they'll have specific like fielded data around this is the trigger date of this option type, right? And you have to have everything figured out by that date. Well, if that's just written into a blob of text, that's not very useful. So just going through historically, and the first thing is to admit you have a problem. The second is to actually fix it in an ongoing fashion, right? And then third, you go back historically and attempt to clean it up. But it's like I said at the beginning, like the idea of having a prioritized list of fixes that you want to make, and then sort of coming up with an action plan for each. That's really what we're seeing a lot of people do across with this concept of inconsistency, is identify the biggest offenders of that. And a lot of times, like I said, it ends up being a concept of duplicate objects, the concept of bad data around what is traditionally unstructured data, which is really anything you're pulling directly from a lease and attempting to bring it into a system. Options, perfect example of that.
So just to be very blunt, why does it matter? Why does having data consistency matter to a property management company?
I mean, because if you don't bring it to a consistent state, it's useless, right? Like if you wanted to attempt to aggregate, anything really, but if you wanted to attempt to aggregate, here are the situations where I'm dealing with the right of first offer across the entire portfolio, and here are the situations, like here are the next 14 dates that are coming up, right? If one or two of the parts of your portfolio happen to have it in a structured fashion and the other 7/8 don't, right? You're going to be in a situation where you have a very incomplete report, and you basically have to read every single lease in every single building.
Yeah, and I think that it also allows members of an organization, whether they be on a leasing team or an asset management team, to be more proactive with their own data set rather than being reactive to the data that they have, right? So, if you're talking about your leasing pipeline and deals that you have, having all of the data objects related to that deal being structured and tied back to that one unique deal ID, and then having that data be consistent across all of your leasing activity gives you the ability to aggregate that data and create insights with that data to make smarter decisions going forward, rather than the inconsistency in that data if you're managing it on disparate Excel sheets, where you can, sure, answer a question that was asked of you about that one specific deal by going to wherever it is on whatever sheet it may be on and finding the answer that way. You can certainly be reactive to one-off questions, but having that layer of consistency and that layer of structure that allows you to see the data in a different way, in a more aggregated way, and in a more strategic way.
Yeah, every customer we talk to, they're quickly becoming in their own minds a data company, right? And they have these lofty goals of predicting, like using AI and machine learning, predicting the future state of markets and rents, and in truth, none of that's going to be even close to possible until you've cleaned up the data, right? Because to do things like saying this industry is specifically you're getting 30% higher rents in this market from this industry, right? The ability to do that it's almost impossible if you have inconsistencies across different parts of that market, right? In the way that the data is actually stored and the level of detail that you get in different buildings in the same market, right? And it just needs to be in a common model for you to model anything. And the lofty goals that any of these companies have in terms of being able to be more predictive, to get ahead of the curve, to be more proactive instead of reactive to trends in real estate, none of it's going to be even close to possible until you have consistent data across all of your systems.
Across your systems, and then also across, obviously, companies that have multiple properties. And, speaking to that, a lot of companies have multiple stakeholders who all may want to look at the data differently. There's different touch points of the data amongst different shareholders. How can you ensure as a property organization or real estate company that your data can be both accurate as well as shared easily?
Yeah, that's actually, there's a lot of different techniques. A lot of it comes back to data governance, as I mentioned before, but in truth, it really comes down to a couple different things. I think having a system you can rely on, like a data warehouse of sorts, where you're bringing everything together into a single view. A lot of our more advanced customers that have sort of made a lot more of a journey down this road, that's the kind of solution that they're leaning toward. And the second piece of that is actually pretty vital, which is like understanding that that's not something that just happens, right? Like having people whose sole job is to ensure the success of these types of requests, these type of reports, these type of BI initiatives, right? Instead of having it be 14 different people, 10% of their job, right? And having this idea that it'll just happen if we all kind of throw some time at it, right? The idea of actually hiring a team of people whose job it is, and oftentimes that includes very technical people, like actual DBAs, people who built out these types of systems before, maybe not necessarily in real estate, but somewhere, right? That is where I'm seeing the most success across our customer base, is when you actually create a dedicated team, oftentimes of engineers. It's okay to have consultants that will help you through this type of process, but at the end of the day, the consultants are gone at a certain point and you need to be able to run it yourself. So having a technical team that can actually support these types of initiatives is huge. That's the team that's going to actually decide on the data governance. That's the team that's going to be held responsible. Their goals at an organizational level will be the ability to deliver these types of reports, these types of requests, these type of insights, right, on a regular basis accurately, and they'll be held accountable to that. And I think the other piece of that, not just the technical side, but having someone whose job it is to own that, right, and that's more from an organizational change perspective. Someone whose job, could be a chief data officer, could be a chief data architect, could be a data something, right? The point is, it's not some executives 10% of their time. Same thing happens on the exec level or the higher levels within an organization. It takes someone who's going to be sort of a arbiter of change, and that person's role is literally to change the hearts and minds of like, yes, this is how we used to do it. Yes, we used to pull it out of this Excel sheet. Yes, it used to take 2 weeks to do that. We're going to be able to do that instantly now. This is why I'm going to need some of your team's time. This is why I'm going to need your support on this. This is why we're going to have these costs incurred, right? If you have someone whose sole job is to bring that change about, you're far, far more likely to be successful. And the key is that they actually have the political capital, the clout, the seniority to be able to push these types of initiatives without getting a lot of resistance throughout the rest of the organization. And that's oftentimes the only times I see success in these types of initiatives is when you actually have both the technical and the arbiter of change type role existing.
I think it also helps. You mentioned multiple stakeholders within, a building or a fund or a portfolio. It definitely also helps to identify the source systems of record when it comes to certain areas of data, right? So you have multiple JV partners on the ownership side of buildings who are utilizing a property manager, and then who are utilizing another organization for the leasing activity, right? A brokerage. All collaborating in one centralized system, utilizing that one system as the source of that leasing data, or whatever area of data that it might be.
It sounds like VTS.
Capital projects, acquisition, disposition, whatever it may be. But collaborating in one system and having that be the source, and then that system can go ahead and be open, right? That's what we're all hearing when we're out in the market is the open technology ecosystem. Having a suite of APIs that allow for the seamless flow of data into whatever internal systems that you may have. As Rick was mentioning, if you have a BI tool, a data warehouse that you utilize, having that data be fed from certain systems that are identified as the source where multiple stakeholders can collaborate on. I think that's a starting point to at least get to some layer of structure and standardization across multiple stakeholders.
Yeah, like the idea of what you're describing is a system of record for each type of data. And while you might be using multiple systems, like the system of record for accounting, MRI, the system of record for leasing is VTS. The system of record for budgeting might be Argus or a couple other players, right?
Right.
Like that's the key. And then having those systems be as open as possible so that you can do what you need to with the data and bringing it downstream to make any of these decisions is key.
And so we've been discussing a lot on the internal processes and what companies can do and hiring people to be in charge of the data. Taking it more broader or external, what's happening at a larger scale to help companies find the pathways to help not only to protect their data, to clean their data, but then also find the best uses for their data moving forward?
Sure. So I mean, at a larger scale, like we're actually both of our companies are involved in Oscar. The hope is to sort of make the connectivity between companies a lot more efficient. And in essence, the idea is that when a system wants to connect to another system, or a customer has an interest in connecting to two of their systems, right, that we would use a universal standard so that it's not every single integration that you're working on is a point-to-point integration. Because if VTS has 16 partners, then you're going to have 16 integrations, 16 different formats, which isn't optimal, right? Or at a minimum, you're converting everything to a single standard that each vendor/company has sort of created on their own, right? So the idea with Oscar would be at a broader level to get to a point where when I'm sending data out of VTS and MRI is accepting it, right, or vice versa, you're using a single format, and that way when an honest building comes into play and has the same request, no one's building something new. It's like that's where I want to be at a broader level, is that we can all stop spending resources on this connection, right, point to point, and just agree on a format. And in truth, any of the orgs that are involved have the ability to make modifications or suggestions and enhancements to the standard, and that's actually happening a lot faster than it used to, quite a bit faster than it used to. So that's kind of the broader level, the modifications that are the changes I'm seeing in the data governance at a broad level. Also,
just to jump in, for those listeners who may not know, Oscar is the Open Standards Consortium for Real Estate. Mm-hmm. It's a group that is set out for this exact thing, right? Is to create that standardization across multiple organizations, kind of similar to the generally accepted accounting principles for the accounting industry.
Yeah, full disclosure, I am a board member, and selfishly, it makes my job a heck of a lot easier if everyone starts speaking the same language.
So besides the future that you're seeing with Oscar, what else are you seeing as kind of this intersection of data and real estate? Where do you think things are going to go moving forward?
I mean, one of the things that we're working on is that exact concept is, you know, at the end of the day, we would love to get to a point where we can aggregate and anonymize and pull all of the real estate data that we have access to into some of those insights that we were talking about before. Like, what are the trends at a market level? What are the industries that are hottest in this submarket, right? What is the speed at which you should be leasing in this part of San Francisco? What is the actual effect, or what are the trends around supply? What are the trends around demand? Like, the idea of being able to use the data that not only you have access to, but all of your, you know, potential customer base as a vendor is providing, and then using that to scale, right? A lot of people, the first thing they want to do is they want to start to leverage their data at scale. Like we said, it comes down to the data cleanliness, getting it to a certain state. But then beyond that, like, there's a lot of insights. There's a lot of things that happen in the finance realm, for instance, that happen like instantly. You have access to such like a wealth of information that it's almost overwhelming. But in the real estate industry, like, if you want to understand what the rent trend is in a specific submarket, you have to call people, right? You have to literally get on the phone and ask some people's opinions on the current state of that market. That to me is just crazy.
Yeah.
Right? It's very 10 years ago, and I feel like, and it's not just us, like, there's a bunch of different players that have this ability to start to like aggregate information across public sources, across, you know, the various accounting systems. Like, there's a lot that still needs to be done that would 100% service some of these questions that people are trying to answer, and not include a 3-month delay or someone's opinion in the response.
Yeah, and even on that note, I think with the increased focus on the open technology ecosystem, there's even more you can do with the partnerships that we've seen come from this, you know, myriad of CRE tech companies that are out there. At VTS, you know, we hit a milestone with 10 billion square feet of commercial space being leased and asset managed on the platform. There's a lot of other companies out there, a lot of other CRE tech platforms that have reached similar milestones, and I think that getting to a place where there's open web API structures and the ability to share and collaborate on that data, of course, with client permissioning and securities in place, there's a lot that could be done with that data, a lot of insights that can be made where previously it was just you were unable to do so.
So you just mentioned a big milestone, 10 billion square feet now being managed with VTS. What else is new and exciting going on?
Yeah, so I was sort of alluding to it, but the idea of our Market View product is probably one of the most exciting things that we're working on. Moving in the direction of, you know, aggregating and anonymizing data across markets down to the sub-market level, really getting to a point where we can actually start to release this and offer it to customers. We're about to go live. We're actually live already with beta customers in Houston, and we have 4 more markets that we're actually targeting next to try to get to a point where, you know, we really start to get some customer feedback on how valuable it is to see these types of insights in a quasi real-time fashion. And the other thing I think that's really exciting about it is the fact that it's also future-facing, right? There's data that we have on deals that haven't executed yet, right? And that's where we're going to go next, is fully understanding not just what is the current state of the market, what's the current supply, what's the current demand, but where will it go next based on deals that haven't even closed yet, right? And that's where it gets really interesting. I think the other thing that's pretty exciting is we're moving in the direction of marketplace as well. And while the exact details I'll leave for the Accelerate and the product team, at the end of the day, what's really interesting is I'm focused on the data aspects of that project. I mean, at a high level, the idea is that we can more easily offer the demand that exists in a market and connect it directly to the supply, which is the owners, the clients that we already have. We know exactly what inventory is going to be available. We know inventory that's going to be available in the future, months out in some cases.
Supply today and supply tomorrow.
And tying that to the tenant reps and the tenants directly, the tenant community that is going to be interested in that space, and giving them a lot more insight about what the current state, the future state of those spaces will be, is where it gets really interesting. And there's a heck of a lot of detail that needs to be collected, and I'm kind of right in the middle of the weeds of exactly how we're going to make sure that we already have quite a bit of data that can't be collected in any other way. But beyond that, how do we scale that? How do we add additional types of metadata, tie it to spaces, tie it to properties? That's been a lot of my focus.
Yeah, and we want to hear from our customers about what it is they want to see out of the platform, what they want to see out of their data, what they want to see out of the combined, anonymized, and aggregated data, right? What they want to see out of a marketplace. So we invite those VTS customers to come to our user conference, May 6th and 7th at the Conrad in New York City, and would love to continue the conversation there.
Well, thank you both so much for your time today. I really appreciate you jumping onto the podcast and talking to us about data.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And if you'd like more information on VTS, including their upcoming conference here May 6th and 7th, VTS Accelerate, please visit VTS.com. And for all things building success, be sure to check out our new website at buildingsuccess.io. So thank you both, gentlemen, again for your time, and we will see you later.